So today we're going to have another pretty heavy conversation and talk about cesareans.
Yes, this is not typically the planned route of birth, although I've had a number of clients hire for support for a planned C-section. But for the most part, these are big changes to the birth plans of our clients. So we are going to dive into what support looks like during those big changes.
And wherever you are in your birth doula journey, I think there is that first experience. No matter how long we do this, we will have a client that will have a C-section that was not planned, that was not desired. That is the worst case scenario for that client.
The first time you walk through that with someone is very hard.
Yeah.
I remember calling you after the first time I had witnessed that.
That's a very different. So we're going to walk through initially what it looks like when we are supporting a client in there and being in there and postpartum, and then also have that conversation too, because those support looks very different. You know, so we're not going to really walk through that whole process. At this point, whatever has happened has come down to the decision to have a C-section. And now what does that look like?
Yeah. I think one of the things that I found surprising is that once the call's been made, if it's non-emergent and the call's been made to have a C-section, something I wasn't aware of until I experienced it is that mom goes to the OR first. And there's a period of time where it's just you and the birth partner in the room. And the first time it happened, I wasn't prepared for it. So it was a lot of dead air and me twiddling my thumbs and thinking like, oh, what do we do now? And of course, Dad's very anxious in that moment because we've been together often a long time. And now he's separated from his wife and he feels a little bit out of control.
Yeah.
They can't see what's going on. If the decision has been made and it's a big change to the birth plan, they're feeling anxious about that. They're probably tired.
I think too is even in non-emergent, the room becomes chaotic. And I think sometimes that then too is very unsettling. And all this disheveling, mom's gone and now you're sitting with dad. And I think that is really heavy.
I've come to really enjoy and appreciate that time though for what it is. Maybe enjoy is not the right word, but I think appreciate what we can accomplish in that time with dad and how we can help support him. So I usually just open with, okay, how are you doing? This is a really big change. How are you feeling? How are you processing? I sometimes will often reassure him or we can speak more to the circumstances that led to the C-section because if there hasn't been time for that conversation, sometimes he can have questions about why were there so many people? Why were they doing X, Y, and Z? And how long is she going to be back there without me? So talking him through his emotions as well as what to expect when we then go into the OR. Where should he be? What should he be doing? How can he still be supporting her? What my support's going to look like? And making sure that he feels confident. And also that he has a safe space to unload before he walks in there too, because maybe he needs to cry. Maybe he needs to vent. Maybe he's angry or frustrated. Maybe he needs to get all that out there before then he can put on the scrubs and his new facade and go in and meet his child.
That is huge. And I think rewinding a little bit before mom leaves the room, before they're coming in and preparing her to wheel her away, I think that there's things that we can do for both mom and birth partner that we can help to create a little bit of a calming space. So I had 2 C-sections, and in my first is actually when God laid on my heart to become a doula. And I just remember him saying, you are going to be the calm in the storm, right? Because there was so much going on around me, but it was like there was only a focal point for my husband and my doula. That was the moment. And I think of that time of how can we take something that can feel overwhelming and how can we calm and bring down and ease tensions and worries and fears and the things that come with that. Because in non-emergent cesareans, there's usually a conversation, there's usually a time to talk, and then there's usually the decision. And as a doula, the more experience you have, you will see as things lead and build.
The signs leading up to those pins.
And I think to make one statement clear is that witnessing that and knowing isn't predicting their birth. Because I've seen things drastically change in a vaginal birth occur. I think it's being aware of what are the steps, where are we going, what is birth looking, and we are mentally preparing. We're not having that conversation until that conversation is brought into by the provider or the nurse or even the client, where I've had them say, I haven't progressed, or my water's been broken this long. Are they going to say I have to have a C-section? And then usually I'll have the conversation. But I think if they're religious, praying over them, saying scripture. I love providing some oils to be prepared to go with mom. You can put it, like, they leave their gown on. It's usually brought all the way up. So you can stuff it in the little pocket, bring some cotton balls. There's some great ones that are, right, like soothing and relaxing. So that can be a benefit. A smell, distracting also, because there's smells in the OR, and then music for them to play. So a lot of times they might allow moms to connect to the Bluetooth to play music in the OR. So always asking if that's an option. If not, you can push play on the phone right next to mom's head during it, because there's a lot of noises going on. And so that sometimes is overwhelming. And so preparing them as you walk into this now, how can we create it to be a little bit more calmer for you?
I see on a lot of birth plans these days, in the event that I need a cesarean, listing a few things on there that are still really important to them. So having a clear drape, if that's an option, having the leads placed on their back as opposed to on their chest so they don't get in the way of skin to skin once baby's out. I see more and more clients waiting to find out the gender of their baby at birth. And so if it was the plan for dad to announce the gender, that can still happen. Those are some of the more common ones that I see. Am I missing anything about gentle cesareans is a term that's used a lot these days to cover some of those preferences. Breastfeeding in the OR, breastfeeding in the PACU. Pictures, that's a huge one. That is a great role for the doula when we are allowed to go accompany them into the OR. And if not, reminding them to ask somebody to take pictures. So I know for you, when Elizabeth was born, was it Taylor? It was the midwife taking your pictures?
Or the student midwife, Kaylee. So I got really lucky to have like lots of extra in the OR, and Kaylee just
went
all
nuts
the pictures.
With your phone.
Oh, it was so good. I loved it. And even with my first, William, so if you have a midwife, and right, like I delivered in the hospital both times, but if you have to have a C-section, the care transitions to the OB. But they're still there with you, right? They just cannot operate on the OR table because it's not their trained skills, and that's okay. And so that is why they were in there, and the student midwife, and then being able to take pictures. So there's a little bit of extra hands going on in there, and that make it very nice. But I think as a doula, being able to take pictures, and sometimes I'll say this, as having cesareans, I didn't know what type of pictures I would want, but I'm very thankful that I had a full version of the birth so I could make the decision to look. And that's sometimes something I'll address when we are waiting to go back of, would you like me to take pictures of everything? And then you can decide at a certain time to look at them. And so moms still want to see the birth. And you don't have the same visual, and there's a curtain up, and there is importance in the curtain. I do think, especially for dads, to wait, because there's a lot things that you probably were not anticipating to see. And so those pictures can allow you both to see it when you're ready and not in the OR, because they definitely only want one patient, please.
That is something I always mention to dads too. Baby is out. Typically they lift up baby over the curtain to say hi to both parents. If dad's announcing the sex of the baby, that's a great time to do that. And then pretty quickly thereafter, they cut the cord and then bring baby to the bassinet where they're going to do cleanup. They're going to do eye ointment and vitamin K if that's part of the plan. In that moment, I will suggest to dad, do you want to go be with baby? That way mom has a support person in the doula. Dad can go be with the baby, can hear dad's voice and start perking up a little bit. But I always tell dads, eyes ahead, eyes on the baby. Don't turn around. My own dad in my birth did the classic like dad pass out thing
in the
OR because nobody told him not to turn around and look at your wife on the operating table.
Yes. And I think too, placement is huge. And oftentimes this is not the case, but I have had it where, so they have a device that's suctioning blood to keep the area clean during the process. And where it was being collected was actually like right next to mom in her head. And I was like, oh man, like I hope so. Also being like, hey, there's things you might not want to see, so keep it focused here. Because there's a lot of dads who are adamant, like they're not going to even look when mom's having a vaginal birth, and now we're in an OR, and now this is really different. Are you like okay and prepare zone them in? They do phenomenal, but trying to help prepare them. Sometimes you might see something that you didn't anticipate. Okay, so this is from my own birth. I think it's the funniest thing. Did I ever tell you this?
I don't know.
I remember when I was in OR, I smelled popcorn. I don't know why in my head I thought I smelled popcorn. And anyways, my son was in the NICU for a little while, so we had gotten discharged and had to come back and forth. And we're walking through
there's that machine.
There's that machine. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I knew I smelled popcorn.
In the OR?
No, you can't. So this is one of those things where there's smells in the OR from the ground floor to the third floor. I could smell popcorn being made.
Multiple sets of doors
and all the things. OR that's like extremely sterile and behind other. Yeah. So no.
Super nose.
It is not popcorn. So sometimes there are smells that you might equate to something else or right, like that might not smell at least somewhat pleasant.
But I didn't realize the smell that I remember the first time I was in the OR that was unexpected for me, I think, was the cauterizing.
The burning.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I was smelling. So I think sometimes there's just the unknown. And as a doula, you've never experienced a C-section, preparing yourself as well. I was terrified for my first C-section that I would pass out. It was
as
my
the doula,
fear. Yeah.
You were afraid.
I was like, oh my gosh, what if I become that person?
Were you worried about it being triggering for you or about seeing it from a different angle?
Seeing it from a different angle. Yeah. To an appointment with one time, she had a cyst on her hand to get it removed. There was not even blood and I passed out. And so I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to do a whole different level. But thankfully it was very different. But being self-aware of that too. I usually put a cough drop in my mouth or something step into the OR because I always had to, before COVID, right? We still had to wear mask into the OR. And that breathing, my throat always got dry. And I didn't want to cough and I didn't want to, so I always just popped something in my mouth. So that way I wasn't getting a dry throat or anything of that.
The smell can help too. Yeah. And having the flavor, just a different sensation to focus on if you feel like you're getting overwhelmed.
Yeah. Because I don't think this isn't our first element, right? Like we didn't go to school to
This isn't our zone.
Yeah. And so those first few times are
unsettling.
Yeah. And so being able to be prepared as the doula, because we need to fake it till we make it, right? Like we need to we know what we're doing. And so preparing yourself too.
That's a good point too. And I didn't think about it until I just asked you this question. But if you are a doula who has experienced a C-section, especially if it was traumatic for you, to make sure that you have processed that before you're walking into that space with clients.
Yeah.
The client's birth is not the time for the doula to be processing. No. It is definitely okay to process and we should be processing our emotions. And maybe it is triggering and maybe you have healed and processed and maybe the birth is triggering, but in the moment, the client is your priority and you need to support them and then you need to process at a later time outside of that.
100%. That's a great point. And for me, my cesareans were not traumatic, but I think there is a huge element of stepping back into that room. And we touched on it several times, but trauma and the way it's kept in our bodies. So even the lights, the room, the look, if that was the actual hospital you delivered at and back into there.
Some of the providers may be the same. You may see the same nurses.
You need to do the work before. And I would say there should be a lot of work done before you become a doula. If you know you're going to step into that. And there are some people who are exceptional at separating, right? Like I'm in my doula. Nothing is going to affect me in this role at this moment. I'll deal with it once I step out and I'm in my car. I will let it all go. But you have to learn that skill set of being able to separate yourself, because if you allow that to overcome you, that's unsettling too for the clients, right? Because they're looking to you for support.
A note on that, this morning after church, we were at home and it was me and my two daughters who were 9 and 10. And it was just the three of us girls in the house and the baby. And we were getting ready for the day. It was quiet. I often have music playing in the background, but we didn't have any music on. And I keep hearing this sound. It's, oh, I can't tell where it's coming from. And while I'm trying to figure it out, my daughters notice and they hear it and they're like, Mom, what is that? I'm like, I don't actually know. And in my head, I started thinking like there's an animal trapped somewhere inside our house. Something is dying and I don't know what I'm going to find. And this is bizarre. Almost sounded, if I were a person who believed in ghosts, it could have been a ghost. I couldn't tell which room it was coming from. It was so faint and so strange. Had I been alone in my house, I would have lost it. But I have my kids, so I'm like trying to keep it together. And finally we find it. Do you know what it was?
No.
Have you ever been alone at home and one of your kids' toys has made like a stupid noise and scared the living daylights out of you?
That's hilarious.
My son had left an iPad on and Minecraft was like playing in the background. And somebody was like, I don't know the game that well, but they're like walking off a cliff and they're like, wow, dying over and over. So he's like losing multiple lives and they kept hearing it. And so anyway, we find it. I promise this is going to relate to our discussion. We find out what's happening and I'm like, oh, phew. I thought there was a cat dying somewhere in my house, but we find it and I was like, oh, I'm so glad we figured out what that was. And my daughter, the oldest one, she was like, yeah, me too. That was weird. I would have been scared, but you didn't seem scared. So I knew that I didn't have to be scared. And so I think back to what you said, like they look to us we're the experts in this field. So if we're freaking out, then there's a problem.
Yeah.
Something is very wrong. As long as we're not freaking out, everything's good.
Good. And I loved that story. If you've not witnessed a C-section, watch some videos.
Yes.
Try to find raw, uncut videos so you're getting a very natural glimpse into it. Obviously, you can't recreate the sounds or the smells, but recognizing that those are there. And then
I will say, as the doula, you aren't, for the most part, you don't see much of what's going on unless you make an effort to.
Yeah.
So I think more so to just familiarize yourself with the process and be aware, just in case you see something that you didn't mean to, like Dad, you are prepared. But by no means are you upfront and personal. Yeah, because the
anesthesiologist, there are seats or you're standing right behind Dad. There's an exact place for you to be past that curtain line.
Because it's a sterile field as well. Another thing I found surprising, I didn't realize both how quick and how long a process it is. So by the time you get in there and they start, it's really only a matter of minutes until Mom meets her baby.
Yeah.
It goes very quickly. But then the repair is so long, especially if you're on the other end, waiting for you to come back with Elizabeth. That felt like an eternity.
Yeah.
But anytime, if you're not with your client in the OR and you're separated from them, you're wondering what's going on, how things are going, and it feels like a very long time. So I would say average like an hour or so, an hour to 2 hours.
Yeah, I would say on average you're looking at an hour for a pretty standard C-section.
But it could be longer for a variety of reasons. Yes. If there's a lot of scar tissue from a previous cesarean or surgeries, if baby needs any extra attention, there can be a variety of reasons that they run long. So it's not necessarily an emergent matter if it is going long. Longer.
I think that too, you see it on the other side outside of a cesarean too, right? If there's continued bleeding, if there's other stuff. So that can still occur with a C-section, right? There's still the delivery of the placenta. They're still making sure that the uterus is clamping, right? There's still a lot of that going on that sometimes I think because we have a C-section. And that is surprisingly one thing that clients sometimes don't realize. Is that they're going to still have bleeding postpartum. So knowing and being aware of helping your client transition into postpartum too, if they're unfamiliar.
Why don't you explain why they're still bleeding for anyone who doesn't know?
Your placenta is attached to your uterus. When you deliver your placenta, which has to happen, whether vaginal or cesarean, there is an open wound on your uterus. The contractions, that's the clamping down after you've delivered your placenta, that is going to help to reduce the bleeding. But even with a cesarean, that open wound is there. And so you're going to have the same healing process for the uterus in that. But now you also have an incision that's healing as well. But that's not where the bleeding is coming from, unless there is an issue, but your standard postpartum bleeding is going to be from the same open wound from the placenta. And it's, as a doula, you don't know everything, right? You learned so much along the process in the journey. And so one thing you can do too is educate yourself on the postpartum for
There's often a lot of support that goes into that.
Yeah.
They have questions afterwards about recovery and you know when and how often to be checking in on them.
Yeah, I think encouraging them and giving them tips and helping them, because the healing is a little bit different, right? Like we think about moms who have had a vaginal delivery and doing meds, to help.
Peri pads.
Yeah, help that. But, like mom's healing a scar. And so just being aware of things. Another big topic is pain medicine and postpartum. And I, as a CLC, I actually continue to encourage my clients to take the pain meds that they feel they need, their decision and everything, because if they're in pain, it's not allowing their body to do then the next step of producing milk.
Yeah.
And there can be a lot of fear of the baby getting that. But one, having some education, there's a really good app, and we'll put it on the website for medicine that you could recommend that they download, or you can download and be able to show them, hey, here's what it says in regards to nursing with your baby, to help encourage them of, one, you're not provided anything that cannot be taken, and two, that your body needs to heal. And if we're in pain, we're not healing.
And the resources are going towards managing that pain and helping you recover, as opposed to starting the milk production process. So there's going to be a delay there.
And everyone's mom or medicine needs are different, supporting and what that needs to look like. Yeah.
Okay. Have you attended or supported a birth?
I have not.
For a cesarean under general?
Yeah.
I've had two. One was a little more planned than the other. One was a true emergency, and one was due to a back surgery. She wasn't able to have the spinal. So that left general as the only option. And I think, both require some pretty intense support. So the non-emergent one, the conversation had been on the table for a while, and we saw it coming. And so that was actually my first ever C-section. And that's when I learned that mom goes back. I had known that under general, no one's allowed in the room. And so I waited with dad. And so we had quite a long time together. Ended up being about a couple of hours. And I had the opportunity to get some food. We chatted a little while. We napped. And then when mom came back, because I had never supported any cesarean, I wasn't sure what the postpartum was going to look like. But coming out of general anesthesia, I think looks different for everyone. But oftentimes moms can be very emotional. Can I talk about your surgery?
Yeah.
You had your appendix out, and I came to the hospital to be with you because Nick's parents were out of town, and he needed to go get William from school. And
we had a 3-month-old.
There was the whole thing with Elizabeth and not taking a bottle, and things were very stressful.
Yeah.
And you needed support.
Like when someone's your doula, they're your doula for life. So when you have to get your appendix out,
call your doula.
You're my best friend.
So I get there, and Stacey has already gone back. And so Nick's in the waiting room with their 3-month-old. And he said, it'd be really important for her to have somebody here when she wakes up. And I said, okay, great, I'm here. And he said, by the way, she doesn't come out of anesthesia very well. Okay, bye. Like, wait, what?
Yeah.
What do you
What's
mean?
That mean?
And it ended up being fine. I don't remember it being a difficult experience for you, but not many people have had general anesthesia. And so mom's going into it, you often don't know how you're going to respond coming out.
And your emotions before greatly impact when you come out of. So in that scenario, I had been in so much pain up to like getting my appendix out that I think I probably woke up better. In the past, I had not. I had come out very emotional and sobbing and not okay. Whereas like most of the time, they don't let people back when you're first coming out of general, where like I had a previous surgery and they had to go get my husband to come calm me down because so that's probably where he's like, you be ready.
Good luck.
But so I think your emotional state going in. So even furthermore, when it is an emergent C-section, the emotions going into that, mom is probably not going to come out in a state of, wow, I just had my appendix removed and I feel so much better.
Yes.
Right? Like they're grasping and sometimes not even aware, wait, like I just had a baby.
Yeah. So the emergent one that I attended, she was very confused, not emotional in that she wasn't crying or visibly upset, but she was very confused. I think because you wake up and you're not pregnant anymore. And the last thing you remember is you had your baby in your belly. And so she kept saying, where's my baby? Where's my baby? The baby was right there. Dad was holding the baby because she didn't have full muscle control to be able to hold the baby yet. And so she'd ask and he'd say, she's right here. She's beautiful. We had a girl. And she'd say, okay. And then she'd go back out of it again. She'd wake up, where's the baby? Where's the baby? And a lot of confusion.
Yeah.
That's such good insight that you said. I didn't even think about that. But I think state of mind going into it, because that's the last thing they remember. remember. It's like their last cognitive thought, and then they're put under, and so they wake up and their brain just picks up where they left off. But obviously many things are different. So in that scenario, mom went back very urgently. Dad and I stood in the hallway. We prayed together. This was an unusual circumstance because I don't think this is typically possible, but we were right outside the OR. We heard when the baby was born. Which was incredible because the reason they had gone back so quickly was they couldn't find a heartbeat. Yeah. And so we heard this great cry, amazing cry. We knew baby was okay. It was a little bit before then we could see mom, but then the staff came out and said everything's fine. Yeah. And we then went to the PACU to wait for her. And I think in retrospect, or in the postpartum when we were talking about it, Dad said he was never fearful. He felt confident the whole time, which I was so grateful to hear that because I feel like that means my job was well done, that he felt okay and not scared. Because on the inside, I didn't know what was going to happen. And I was very happy that neither of them felt the experience was traumatic, even though I think it very greatly had the potential to be that way. We were able to maintain calm and peace. And so, mom coming out of it emotional, lots of questions. It can be a while before they are able to hold their baby just because they don't have that muscle control yet. Yeah. They've got a lot of meds still in their system. Their brain is trying to catch up and process everything that's happened. And so having you and the partner there together to support breastfeeding, this is a great time where you ask mom's permission and you can just hold the baby on the boob if they are wanting to start breastfeeding. That's good. Food and drink. Oftentimes, depending on the circumstances, some people will be very hungry if they have been in labor for a very long time. They don't encourage eating right away, but I see more and more now that they are letting people start slowly with things and work up towards it, whereas before it was like nothing for 6 to 8 hours. Yeah. But I think now lots of places are recognizing that the sooner we can get things in the system and mom moving, the better she'll be feeling. It's largely because whenever air to the intestines, when it slows the whole process down, but then because of the surgery, there's the concern of if something got twisted. Oh. And so then they want to make sure before you start going back to a full meal that things are moving. So usually that is why they'll start with a liquid and make sure, did you pass gas? Have passed gas. Usually it's, on to the next level. But the duration, because when I had my son, it was like almost 24 hours before I could eat. But I think that too of like, they sometimes don't realize, what do you mean I'm not going to be able to now eat? Like, I already haven't eaten in so long. Yes. Yeah. But reminding them too of, hey, your body just had major surgery. Slow is better than rushing into a Big Mac or whatever it is that mom wants to eat. And so, but that's something that's not often realized. So that said, the time when Dad has a few minutes away from mom, that's a great time for him to grab a quick bite. Yes. Because he might not also be eating for a little while. Yeah, it is so true. Actually, one thing I think, and we've touched on this, but emphasize a little bit more, is when the decision is made to have a cesarean and then who can be in the OR, that is a conversation with the anesthesiologist. And that's a conversation, right? The anesthesiologist is going to come in and have some paperwork signed. And that's usually when they start to increase dosing of an epidural. If it's already been placed, they might place it in there or wait until the OR. It can just depend. But the client needs to vocalize. And sometimes that might not be the client, but Dad saying, hey, like, we want our doula in there. And a lot of times you can say it to the nurse and they know the anesthesiologist standard practice for it. But that's something to know is it's actually not the decision of the OB or the nurse, but the OR is the anesthesiologist's room. And so they make the decision of who can be in there. And so just something to keep, in mind. It can be frustrating, especially if you have been and you've always been allowed in, and then you have someone you've never worked with before and they say no when you're expecting fully to be allowed back to go in. That can be frustrating for the doula and disappointing. And to then the sudden change for the client as well. Wait, you don't get to be in there. And I think you just said it's okay. Going over a few things with Dad, he's going to come back and he's going to be ready and prepared, and I'm going to be waiting for when you come out. Yeah, that's a big thing. We wait. Yeah. We stay there and we wait for them to come back. Yes. This isn't us grabbing our car keys and heading out because the birth is complete. The obligation and responsibility to stay and help postpartum is still there unless there is a dire change. But we are waiting. We are maybe refueling ourselves, taking a minute to process our own emotions, grabbing a bite to eat, maybe a little bit of rest, and then up for the final stretch. How about planned? To consider as well, not so much about the full OR, but when to
to arrive? What do you do? Also, I think that in our discussion of backup, like there's a lot of elements too, regardless of a cesarean being planned, the importance of what support looks like there.
Yeah, when it's planned in advance, whether it's planned the whole pregnancy or something at the end of pregnancy, like a breech baby comes up and then it's planned from there. I always arrive when they arrive at the hospital. It may feel like there's not a ton to do at that time because they're just doing triage stuff and the nurse is charting and a lot of waiting around. There's definitely not tons of physical support happening at that moment, but you being there is a huge emotional support for them. Really just being there with them and sitting in that space and following their lead. They may want to talk about it again and go over what's going to happen so they feel more prepared. Or they may just want to talk about the weather or something that takes their mind off of it. It's going to depend on your client and what makes sense for them. But I think getting there at the same time as them is a good rule of thumb. And usually that's about 2 hours ahead of the planned start time. Or we're scheduled for 10 a.m. They get there at 8.
Yeah. And I think something to note too is with planned cesareans, it can change.
Yes.
Right. So they might show up for their check-in at 8 a.m. to deliver at 10, but guess what? All the rooms are full and it's a non-emergent delivery, right? Like we know general time of like when we should do a cesarean for a breech baby or what that might look like. But it might be that they're bumped. And so a lot of times they do have them. I know with inductions, I'm pretty sure with cesareans too, they have them call and check in a lot of times if it's like a scheduled in advance time.
I have only had one scheduled C-section get bumped, and it was, so we got there, we checked in, and she walked in with a bottle of water, and the nurse said, "Have you been drinking that?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "But you can't. You need to have an empty stomach, so we're going to push your start time." And so we were all already there, which is fine when you think about the amount of time you would spend with a client in labor. A few extra hours on this was not a big deal.
Yeah.
So they didn't go home. I didn't go home. We ended up staying. But that's a good question. I would assume the hospital, it would be the responsibility of the hospital to call and say, "Hey, we're full. We don't have room for you. Don't come at 8. We'll call you when it's time."
I could be wrong, but my understanding is a lot of times when they have a planned cesarean, they want to make sure one OR is open for a laboring client. So I think sometimes that's why it can get pushed if they, not even full rooms, but they have so many women laboring at that time.
They don't want to take an OR for a non-emergency.
Depending on where, if someone else is in one OR. Okay. And so with a planned cesarean, how long do you stay for that one?
Usually about the same, a couple hours after. So making sure that breastfeeding has been initiated, making sure that maybe dad has a chance to go grab a bite to eat, helping advocate for any of mom's needs. So if she's ready to start with liquids, reminding her that she can ask for that, processing, answering any questions. The nurse, I believe, is required to stay in the room with them for an hour after delivery. So there is a nurse in the room, but they are usually pretty busy with charting. And just having a person there who's exclusively focused on breastfeeding and supporting mom emotionally and helping answer questions, I think is appreciated by the nurse as well. I usually stay at least 2 hours. And then it's around that time that they're then going into their postpartum room typically too.
And another huge important factor as a doula is ensuring, even though it's planned, that you have a backup in place for the cesarean client as well as any other clients, because you might get called in the night just hours before you're going to be arriving for that planned cesarean. And so I don't think we can ever emphasize that enough. And then, of course, I think that there's the following. As a doula, we witness a lot of things and we ourselves have to process. So call someone on your way home and maybe you do like an initial processing dump to a doula, talking to a mentor. Maybe you've sat down in a few days, you've recovered, because our emotions are heightened too immediately following births, especially if they've been long, or especially when we know that this was nothing our client wanted. And so sometimes we need to eat and sleep on it. And then, okay, we're recentered. Now I can process it, call a mentor when you feel ready, when it feels right, like that type of stuff. But I think that there's huge importance to make sure that you have processed it before stepping into another birth. So that way you're not carrying that weight with you.
Yes. And a huge note on the processing. I think it is definitely normal for us to feel disappointed, especially if that's how the clients are feeling, discouraged and sad. I think those are all normal and valid emotions to be feeling after this. Something that was hard for me initially was feeling the thought of, was there something I missed that we could have done differently and this birth may have had a different outcome? The answer to that is no. We should not be taking responsibility for positive birth outcomes. My client had a vaginal birth and she couldn't do it without me, and it's so great they hired me because I'm the reason they got that birth they wanted. Nor should we be taking responsibility for births that don't go according to plan. Everything went wrong. It's my fault. I should have done X, Y, or Z. No birth outcome is because of us. We are not responsible for any birth outcome. We are here to help improve outcomes by empowering our clients in their decision making. So it's a slippery slope, but a dangerous one, and one that we need not live on in terms of, wow, what could have I done different? What could I have done differently to ensure the birth that she wanted?
Yeah.
That's not our role. We're not here to ensure any outcome. I think there's a fine line between, okay, what have we learned from this experience? Maybe we've learned that this provider does a lot of C-sections, or maybe we've learned that 6 centimeters and having an epidural isn't the same as getting an epidural when the baby's at -1 station. Or there's so many things to be learned from each birth experience, but so important for us not to carry the weight of the C-section on our own shoulders and feel that we let our clients down, or that we have somehow failed. That's not a healthy base for us to be in.
Yeah, because I think you could have done everything and the outcome have been the same. And I heard this along the way, and I carry it through, and I tell other doulas, is that sometimes the baby and the body know what's best. And so sometimes that means they're saying, hey, we can't do this. Like, it looks like everything should be working. We've done all the positions. Why is baby not descending? Like, we're right there. She should be pushing. Baby's not coming. Right. And so you end up with a C-section, even though you were so close. And then they go in and they find out that there's just umbilical cords are different sizes for every baby. That baby would not have been able to deliver through the vaginal canal. So I think there's so much that we don't know and we're not privy to know. Very rarely do we get to hear or see, and the same for the clients, to really understand why they had a C-section. You get the standard, what's put on the paperwork, failure to progress. But I think that there's way more to that of failure to progress, because there was no way the baby was going to descend, but that's not an answer that can go on the paper. There's so much that you don't know that's happening behind that curtain that I think emphasizes that of you can't carry the weight of it. And you never should. If you are walking in and you are providing, seamless, professional, knowledgeable support, that's
you've done your job.
You've done it. Yes.
It's hard to sit with clients in difficult spaces when they're navigating those tough emotions, because it's hard for us to see them sad and see them emotional, but that's all part of the process. And those emotions need to come out to the surface and need to be processed. And we're a safe space for them.
Yes.
They're sharing it with us, and that's part of our role too. So sometimes we don't have the answers. We shouldn't be. We're not expected to have all the answers. Sometimes we just need to sit with them in those emotional spaces and be okay with that.
Yeah. And recognize too, are they processing or are they struggling? Because sometimes this is also the place where we need to make recommendation.
Yes.
Of, hey, I think you're carrying a birth trauma. It's important to speak to someone.
Yes.
A counselor, that is. And so I think that time and that processing is just as important as the whole everything. And remember too, in that postpartum, it's about the client's processing. You are not sharing how you felt, what you thought, all of the things, right? That's why you have a mentor. That's why you have other doulas, a network to speak to. You're not sharing how you thought, how you felt, or anything in regards to their birth. You can say, hey, you did an amazing job, but not, hey, I felt so sad that this.
Yes.
None of that.
Not in the space for that. So we're validating their emotions 100%.
Yeah.
But without imposing our own onto them.
Yeah.